My rich wife, the CEO, threw me out after believing her sister's lies. 3 weeks later, she asked if I'd reflected instead. I handed her divorce papers. Her sister lost it. You know how they say hindsight's 20/20? Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes you can see the train wreck coming from a mile away, but you're too damn stubborn to get off the tracks. That's basically the story of my life, or at least the 44 years leading up to this spectacular mess I'm about to lay on you. My name's Marcus Hale, and up until about 3 months ago, I thought I was living the American dream. Picture this: a decent-looking guy with a solid career in project management, married to one of the most powerful women in the city. Clara Whitmore. Yeah, that Whitmore, the one whose face graces the cover of Forbes every other month, was my wife. CEO of Whitmore Luxury Real Estate, a company that basically owns half the prime real estate from Manhattan to the Hamptons. When people heard I was married to Clara Whitmore, their jaws would hit the floor so hard you could hear the thud from 3 blocks away. On paper, we were absolutely perfect. She brought the big bucks, the connections, the kind of influence that gets you tables at restaurants that don't even have names on their doors. Me? I brought stability, reliability, and what she used to call that charming everyman quality that keeps me grounded. Translation: I was the normal guy who made her feel like she wasn't completely living in an ivory tower made of $100 bills. Our wedding photos looked like something straight out of Architectural Digest. Her penthouse overlooking Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel like you were floating above the peasants below. The marble kitchen island cost more than most people's cars, and don't even get me started on the wine cellar that housed bottles worth more than my college education. Clara would joke that marrying me was the best investment she'd ever made, and I'd laugh along, thinking she meant it in the sweet, romantic way couples talk about being each other's better halves. Spoiler alert, she didn't. But here's where our fairy tale takes a hard left into nightmare territory. See, Clara had this younger sister, Sabrina Whitmore, and if Clara was the golden child who could do no wrong, then Sabrina was the family's professional disappointment wrapped in designer clothes and an attitude that could curdle milk. Sabrina was 28, unemployed by choice, and had perfected the art of living off her sister's generosity like it was an Olympic sport. She had this whole setup going. Clara paid for her Manhattan apartment, her credit cards, her gym membership, her therapy sessions, her organic juice cleanses, and probably her monthly manicures that cost more than some people spend on groceries. Sabrina liked to call it family support, but the rest of us called it what it was: freeloading with a trust fund twist. From day one, Sabrina looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in during her morning jog through Central Park. Not that she actually jogged. Physical exertion was beneath someone of her refined sensibilities. But you get the picture. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every casual drop-by visit, she'd give me this look. You know the one. Like she was mentally calculating exactly how much of her sister's money I was going to cost them over the years. The thing about Sabrina was that she had this talent for making her poison sound like concern. Clara, honey, don't you think Marcus seems a little too comfortable with your lifestyle? She'd say, her voice dripping with fake worry. I mean, it's so sweet how he's adapted to luxury so quickly. Almost like he was born for it, you know? And Clara, bless her brilliant but naive heart, would just nod along like Sabrina was dropping profound wisdom instead of passive-aggressive grenades designed to blow up my marriage from the inside. The dinner table conversations became my personal hell. Picture this scene. Clara at the head of the table, discussing her latest multi-million-dollar deal while casually sipping wine that cost more per bottle than most people make in a week. Me, trying to contribute something meaningful to the conversation while simultaneously wondering if my middle-class background was written all over my face like a scarlet letter. And Sabrina, sitting there with that smirk. Oh, that damn smirk. Like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Marcus, tell us about your day, Sabrina would say with fake sweetness, and somehow she'd make it sound like she was asking me to explain quantum physics to a toddler. Did you manage any interesting projects today? Nothing too stressful, I hope. We wouldn't want you getting overwhelmed. The subtext was always there, thick as molasses. You don't belong here. You're not good enough for my sister. You're just another gold digger with better manners. And slowly, painfully, I started to notice Clara changing. The woman who used to look at me like I hung the moon began studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Her laugh became more polite than genuine. Her questions about my work started sounding less like interest and more like interrogation. "How was your day, sweetheart?" became, "So what exactly did you accomplish today?" The shift was subtle at first, like watching paint dry or grass grow, but it was there. Every conversation felt like I was being cross-examined by a prosecutor who'd already decided I was guilty. Sabrina was a master manipulator, the kind of person who could plant seeds of doubt so skillfully that you'd swear they grew there naturally. She never outright accused me of anything. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she'd make these little comments, these tiny suggestions that burrowed into Clara's brain like psychological termites. "I just worry about you sometimes, Clara," she'd say during their sister bonding sessions that I wasn't invited to. "You're so trusting, so generous. Some people might take advantage of that beautiful heart of yours." And Clara, who could spot a bad business deal from a mile away, who could negotiate million-dollar contracts in her sleep, somehow couldn't see that her own sister was playing her like a fiddle. The worst part? I could see it happening. Every single day, I watched my marriage crumble one whispered conversation at a time, one raised eyebrow, one perfectly timed sigh from Sabrina. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash where you're the passenger and someone else is driving straight toward the guardrail. I tried talking to Clara about it once. Big mistake. Huge. She looked at me like I'd just suggested her sister was running a meth lab out of her Park Avenue apartment. "Sabrina loves me, Marcus. She's just looking out for me. Maybe if you tried harder to understand her instead of always being defensive." That's when I realized I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. Because in Clara's mind, I was the outsider, the variable that didn't quite fit the equation of her perfect life. Sabrina had been there first, had 28 years of history and shared memories and inside jokes. I had 3 years of marriage and a growing reputation as the paranoid husband who couldn't handle his sister-in-law's honest concern. But here's what neither of them knew. I might have been the stable, reliable, everyman husband, but I wasn't stupid. And I sure as hell wasn't going down without a fight. They thought they had me figured out. They thought I'd just roll over and accept whatever fate they decided for me. Boy, were they wrong. If I thought Chapter 1 was bad, let me tell you about the masterclass in psychological warfare that Sabrina put on during the following months. This woman didn't just thrive on drama. She practically had a PhD in it. I'm talking about someone who could create conflict in an empty room and somehow make it everyone else's fault. You ever meet someone who treats lying like an art form? That was Sabrina Whitmore in a nutshell. She didn't just tell lies. She crafted them, polished them, and served them up with such conviction that you'd start questioning your own memories. It was honestly impressive in the most terrifying way possible. The affair accusations started on a Tuesday. I remember because I was supposed to meet Clara for lunch at that overpriced bistro she loved downtown. The kind of place where they charge $30 for a salad and call it artisanal. I was running late from a client meeting when my phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Rain check on lunch." Need to think about some things Sabrina told me. Some things Sabrina told her. Those 6 words should have come with a hazmat warning because they were about to poison everything we'd built together. When I got home that evening, the temperature in our penthouse felt like it had dropped about 20 degrees. Clara was sitting in her favorite chair, the white leather monstrosity that cost more than most people's monthly rent. With this look on her face like she'd just discovered I'd been running a human trafficking ring out of our spare bedroom. "We need to talk," she said. And brother, if you've ever been married, you know those 4 words are basically the relationship equivalent of code red. All hands on deck. Prepare for impact. "Sure, babe. What's up?" I said, trying to keep things light while my stomach was doing gymnastics routines that would make an Olympic athlete jealous. Clara took a deep breath, the kind you take before you jump off a cliff or tell someone their dog died. "Sabrina saw you having lunch with a woman today. A blonde woman. At Cafe Milano. Now, here's where it gets absolutely ridiculous. First off, I wasn't at Cafe Milano. I was in a conference room with 3 middle-aged guys discussing pipeline schedules for a construction project. Second, the only blonde I'd interacted with all day was the barista at Starbucks who spelled my name Marcus, despite me spelling it out for her. But Sabrina had planted this seed, and Clara was already nurturing it like it was going to bloom into a beautiful garden of justified suspicion. "Clara, honey, I was in meetings all day. I can show you my calendar, my emails. Hell, I can probably get security footage from my office building if you want. But here's the thing about Sabrina's lies. They were never just about the facts. They were about creating an atmosphere, painting a picture, building a narrative where I was the villain and she was the concerned sister trying to save Clara from heartbreak. It's not just today, Marcus, Clara said, and I could practically hear Sabrina's voice coming out of her mouth. She's been noticing things. The way you've been dressing better lately. How you've been staying late at work more often. The fact that you've been more attentive to your appearance. I stared at her like she'd just told me the earth was flat and birds were government surveillance drones. You mean I've been dressing better because you bought me better clothes? And staying late because we landed 3 new major clients? And taking care of my appearance because I'm married to one of the most successful women in the city and I don't want to embarrass you at business functions. But logic doesn't work when someone's already decided you're guilty. Clara had that look in her eyes, the same one she got when she was closing a particularly difficult real estate deal. She'd made up her mind, and now she was just looking for evidence to support her conclusion. The money accusations came next, because apparently I was supposed to be both an unfaithful husband and a financial parasite. According to Sabrina's latest intel, I'd been funneling funds into side businesses and using Clara's connections for personal gain. This was rich coming from someone whose only job was professionally spending her sister's money. But hey, who's keeping track? She showed me bank statements, Marcus. Transfers you've been making. Money going into accounts I don't recognize. This is where I almost laughed, because the mysterious transfers were me putting money into a savings account to surprise Clara with a trip to Italy for our anniversary. The unknown accounts were literally marked Anniversary Fund, Italy Trip in my banking app. But Sabrina had taken screenshots at just the right angle to make it look suspicious, like some kind of financial forensics expert who'd flunked out of detective school. Clara, those are savings for your anniversary present. I can log into my account right now and show you. Or, she said, and I could practically hear Sabrina whispering in her ear, you could have set that up as a cover story in case I found out. This is when I realized I was dealing with conspiracy theory levels of paranoia. No matter what evidence I provided, there was always another explanation that painted me as the bad guy. It was like playing chess with someone who changed the rules every time they were about to lose. The worst part wasn't even the accusations themselves. It was watching Clara transform into someone I didn't recognize. This woman who used to trust me completely, who would defend me against anyone and everyone, was now treating every word out of my mouth like it needed to be fact-checked by 3 independent sources. My friends tried to warn me. Dave from work took me out for drinks and said, "Dude, that sister-in-law of yours is straight up toxic. Clara's letting her pull the strings like she's a puppet." My buddy Mike was more direct. "Brother, you need to get ahead of this situation before it gets worse. That Sabrina chick has it out for you, and she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants." But I was stubborn. I thought love would win out over manipulation. I thought 3 years of marriage would count for more than a lifetime of sisterly bonds built on financial dependency and emotional manipulation. I thought Clara would eventually see through Sabrina's games and realize what was happening. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Catastrophically, spectacularly wrong. The confrontation that changed everything happened on a Thursday night. I remember because we were supposed to watch the season finale of that show Clara liked. The one about rich people with rich people problems that somehow made our actual rich people problems seem quaint by comparison. Instead, Clara was waiting for me in the living room with what looked like a full presentation prepared. I'm talking printed emails, highlighted bank statements, a timeline of my alleged infidelities that would have impressed a federal prosecutor. Sabrina's fingerprints were all over it, but Clara presented it like she'd uncovered it all herself. "I can't do this anymore, Marcus," she said, her voice colder than a Manhattan winter. "Sabrina wouldn't lie to me about something this serious. She loves me. She's looking out for me. And everything she's told me, it all adds up." That's when I knew I'd lost. Not because of anything I'd done, but because Sabrina had played the long game perfectly. She'd convinced Clara that love meant suspicion, that trust was naive, and that the sister who'd been bleeding her dry financially was more reliable than the husband who'd been building a life with her. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. But sometimes when you're in the middle of the storm, you can't see the hurricane forming around you. The house that once felt like home had officially become enemy territory. You know that moment in movies where the protagonist gets the rug pulled out from under them, and there's always this dramatic music swelling in the background while they stand there looking shocked and betrayed? Well, real life doesn't come with a soundtrack. And let me tell you, getting kicked out of your own home is a lot less cinematic and a lot more soul-crushingly pathetic than Hollywood would have you believe. It was a Friday evening in October. I remember because the leaves in Central Park were just starting to turn, and I'd been thinking about how Clara and I used to take walks through there during our first autumn together. Funny how your brain focuses on the stupidest details when your world's about to implode. I'd just gotten home from work, loosening my tie and looking forward to a quiet weekend. Maybe ordering from that Thai place Clara liked. Watching something mindless on Netflix. You know, normal married couple stuff. Instead, I walked into what felt like a corporate boardroom meeting where I was both the defendant and the guy who didn't get the memo about what he was being accused of. Clara was standing in our living room. Excuse me, her living room, as I was about to be reminded, wearing that navy blue power suit that meant business. Not the fun kind of business, either. The kind of business that ends with someone getting fired, divorced, or in my case, both simultaneously. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was colder than a penguin's ass in Antarctica, and behind her, like some sort of designer-dressed demon whispering in her ear, stood Sabrina with a smirk that could have powered half of Manhattan. "We need to talk," Clara said, which was becoming her favorite phrase lately. It was like she'd trademarked those 4 words and decided to use them as a weapon of mass destruction against my peace of mind. "Okay," I said, setting down my briefcase and trying to read the room. The vibe was somewhere between funeral parlor and execution chamber, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a conversation about weekend plans or whose turn it was to pick up the dry cleaning. Clara took a deep breath, the kind you take before you perform surgery or demolish a building. "Pack your things, Marcus. I can't trust you anymore." Just like that. No preamble, no lengthy explanation, no dramatic build-up. Just a sentence that hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo load of what the actual hell. I stood there for a moment, waiting for the punchline or the hidden camera crew or literally anything that would make this make sense. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, because apparently my brain had decided to take a little vacation right when I needed it most. "You heard me," Clara said, and her voice had that flat, executive tone she used when she was firing underperforming employees. "I want you out of this house. Tonight. I can't have someone I don't trust living under my roof anymore." Under her roof. Not our roof. Her roof. Because apparently, 3 years of marriage had just been me crashing at Clara's place like some kind of overstayed house guest who'd finally worn out his welcome. Behind her, Sabrina was practically vibrating with satisfaction. She wasn't even trying to hide her glee anymore. The mask was off, the gloves were down, and she was basking in her victory like a cat who'd just caught the biggest, dumbest mouse in the history of pest control. "Clara, honey, let's talk about this," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, like I was negotiating a business deal instead of fighting for my marriage. "Whatever Sabrina told you. Don't." Clara held up her hand like a traffic cop stopping a speeding car. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on my sister. Sabrina didn't make you lie to me. Sabrina didn't make you sneak around behind my back. Sabrina didn't make you use me for my money and connections." It was like listening to a greatest hits album of all the garbage Sabrina had been feeding her for months. Suggestion
Every
that had been
accusation,
slowly killing our
every
marriage was
twisted
right there
half-truth,
in Clara's
every
voice,
poisonous.
delivered with the conviction of someone who'd completely bought into the con. "None of that is true, Clara, and you know it," I said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into my voice despite my best efforts to stay cool. "I've never lied to you. I've never cheated on you, and I sure as hell have never used you for anything. I love you." Sabrina actually snorted at that. Literally snorted, like I'd just told the world's worst joke at the world's most inappropriate time. "Oh, please, Marcus. Save the performance for someone who's buying tickets. I'm not talking to you," I said, turning to look directly at her for the first time since this nightmare conversation started. "In fact, I'm pretty sure none of this is any of your damn business. It became my business the moment you started hurting my sister." Sabrina shot back, her voice dripping with fake righteous indignation. "Clara deserves better than someone who lies to her face every single day." That's when Clara stepped in, and the way she positioned herself, slightly in front of Sabrina, like she was protecting her from me, told me everything I needed to know about where her loyalties lay. Sabrina wouldn't lie to me about something this serious. Marcus. She loves me. She's looking out for me. And frankly, she's been right about you from the beginning. Right about me from the beginning. As in, Sabrina had been planning my downfall since day one, and Clara was just now admitting it out loud. As in, my wife had been listening to her sister poison our marriage for 3 years, and instead of defending our relationship, she'd been taking notes. So that's it? I asked, and I could feel something hardening inside my chest, like my heart was turning to stone in real time. 3 years of marriage, and you're just going to throw it all away because your unemployed, freeloading sister convinced you I'm some kind of criminal mastermind. The unemployed and freeloading comments hit their mark. Sabrina's face flushed red, and for a second, I saw a crack in her smug facade. But Clara stepped even further forward, her CEO instincts kicking in to protect her investment. Leave, Marcus. Now, before I call security. Security. She was threatening to call security on her own husband. In the home we'd shared for 3 years. The home where we'd laughed together, fought together, made love, made plans for the future, celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays. She was going to have me escorted out like some kind of trespasser who'd overstayed his welcome at a house party. I looked around the living room one last time. At the couch where we used to watch movies together, at the dining table where we'd hosted dinner parties, at the windows that looked out over the city we'd planned to grow old in together. All of it felt foreign now, like I was looking at someone else's life through a museum display case. Fine, I said, and my voice sounded strange and distant, even to me. I'll pack a bag. As I headed toward the bedroom. Excuse me, her bedroom, to grab some clothes and essentials, I could hear Sabrina whispering something to Clara, probably cementing her victory with some final poisonous observation about how this proved she'd been right all along. I threw some shirts, pants, underwear, and toiletries into a single duffel bag, moving on autopilot while my brain tried to process what had just happened. 3 years of my life, reduced to whatever I could fit in one bag during a 10-minute packing session while my wife's sister watched from the doorway, like a prison guard making sure I didn't steal the silver. When I walked back into the living room, Clara was standing by the door, holding it open like she couldn't wait to get me out of her sight. Sabrina was practically bouncing on her toes with excitement. This is a mistake, Clara, I said one last time. And someday you're going to realize it. The only mistake I made was trusting you in the first place, she replied, not even looking at me. So I walked out. I walked out of the penthouse, out of the building, out of the life I'd built with someone I thought loved me enough to at least give me the benefit of the doubt. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt like a coffin lid slamming shut. Standing on the sidewalk with my single bag, watching taxis and pedestrians go about their normal Friday evening routines, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Underneath all the hurt and anger and betrayal, there was this weird sense of relief. Like I'd finally stopped pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and promising to be a better boy. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. You ever been to one of those fancy spas where they put you in a sensory deprivation tank and tell you it's supposed to be therapeutic? Well, let me tell you about the 3 weeks I spent in my crappy downtown apartment, because it was basically the same experience, except instead of finding inner peace, I was plotting the most elegant revenge in the history of marital warfare. My new place was what real estate agents like to call cozy, and normal people call a shoebox with delusions of grandeur. 600 square feet of pure mediocrity, complete with a refrigerator that sounded like a dying whale, and neighbors who apparently thought practicing interpretive dance at 2 in the morning was a perfectly reasonable life choice. After 3 years of living in Clara's penthouse palace, this place felt like I'd been demoted from first class to the cargo hold of life. But you know what? It was mine. Nobody could kick me out of it. Nobody could stand in the living room and tell me to pack my things because they didn't trust me anymore. And most importantly, nobody could fill the air with poisonous whispers about what a terrible person I was while I was trying to watch Netflix and eat cereal for dinner like a functioning adult. The first few days were rough, I'll admit it. I spent a lot of time staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell my life had taken such a hard left turn into Crazyville. I'd wake up in the morning and reach for Clara. only to remember that Clara was probably having champagne breakfast with her psychotic sister, celebrating their victory over the evil husband who'd apparently been running some kind of long-con marriage scam for 3 years. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It's actually pretty solid ground to build on. And while I was sitting there in my apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and wondering if this was what a midlife crisis looked like, something interesting started happening. My phone wasn't ringing. Not once. Not a single call from Clara asking how I was doing, or if I was okay, or if maybe we should talk about things like adults instead of letting her sister orchestrate my exile, like some kind of designer-dressed puppet master. Radio silence. Complete and total radio silence. Which told me everything I needed to know about how much my 3-year marriage had really meant to her. Apparently, throwing out your husband was like throwing out old furniture. Once it's gone, you don't really think about it anymore. But Sabrina? Oh, Sabrina was having the time of her life. Social media became her personal victory lap, and I got to watch the whole show from my front row seat in Loserville. Instagram stories featuring expensive lunches with captions like, "So grateful for family, who really have your back." Facebook posts about toxic people and how sometimes you have to cut dead weight to truly flourish. Twitter updates about supporting strong women who deserve better. Each post was like a little digital middle finger aimed directly at me. And the worst part? She was doing it all from Clara's accounts, Clara's events, Clara's money. The unemployed sister who'd never worked a day in her life was playing social media influencer with someone else's success. And somehow, I was the villain in this story. But instead of getting pissed off, which is what the old Marcus would have done, I started getting curious. Because here's what didn't add up. If I was such a terrible husband, such a lying, cheating, money-grabbing scumbag, why wasn't Clara talking about it? Why wasn't she posting her own free at last celebration posts? Why was Sabrina doing all the public victory dancing while Clara stayed conspicuously quiet? That's when I started paying attention to the details. And brother, when you're a project manager who spent 20 years of his career catching other people's mistakes and fixing other people's messes, you develop a pretty good eye for things that don't quite line up. Like the fact that Clara's company had been unusually quiet lately. No big announcements, no new developments, no press releases about record-breaking sales quarters. For a woman who usually treated her business success like a full-contact sport, the silence was deafening. Like the fact that Sabrina's social media posts, while frequent and obnoxious, were all taking place at the same handful of locations. The Penthouse, that overpriced cafe Clara liked, the same 3 or 4 restaurants. For someone who was supposedly living her best life, she wasn't getting around much. Like the fact that none of Clara's business associates or friends had reached out to me. Not to offer condolences, not to ask what happened, not even to be nosy about the divorce rumors that were probably circulating through their social circles like wildfire. In a community where gossip traveled faster than bad stock tips, the complete silence was weird. So I started doing what I do best, research. Not the creepy stalker kind of research. I'm not a psychopath. But the methodical, professional kind of research that comes from years of managing complex projects where one missed detail can cost everyone involved a fortune. I started with the easy stuff. Public records, business filings, anything that was legally available to anyone who bothered to look. And that's when things started getting interesting. Turns out, Whitmore Luxury Real Estate had been having what you might call a challenging fiscal quarter. Several deals had fallen through. A couple of major investors had pulled out, and there were some regulatory issues with a development project that had been Clara's pet project for the past 2 years. Nothing catastrophic, but definitely not the kind of smooth sailing Clara was used to. Then I started looking into the prenup. You remember the prenup, right? The one Clara had insisted on back when we were so in love that she wanted to make sure I was protected if anything ever happened to her business empire? The one she drafted when she was still thinking with her heart, instead of listening to her sister's paranoid fantasies? Here's something most people don't know about prenups. They're not just about protecting the wealthy spouse from the poor spouse. Sometimes, depending on how they're written and when they're signed, they can work the other way around. Especially when the wealthy spouse initiates a divorce based on false accusations and refuses to attempt counseling or mediation. I spent hours reading through that document, and let me tell you, 3 years ago, Clara had been a very different person from current Clara. 3 years ago, Clara had been madly in love and wanted to make sure I felt secure in our marriage. She'd insisted on clauses that would protect me if she ever became abusive, controlling, or unfaithful. She'd included provisions for substantial alimony if the marriage ended due to her misconduct or unreasonable behavior. Unreasonable behavior. Like, say, throwing your husband out of the house based on lies told by your freeloading sister, without any evidence of actual wrongdoing, and refusing to even attempt to work through your problems like adults. Current Clara probably didn't even remember those clauses. She'd been so focused on protecting her assets from a hypothetical bad husband that she'd accidentally created a legal safety net for the good husband she was about to throw away. While I was discovering this interesting legal tidbit, I also started documenting everything. Screenshots of Sabrina's social media posts, particularly the ones that could be interpreted as harassment or defamation. Records of all my attempts to contact Clara and work things out. Evidence of my actual whereabouts during the times Sabrina claimed I was having affairs or conducting mysterious business meetings. And slowly, quietly, methodically, I started building a case that would have made my old law school professors proud. Not because I was planning to destroy anyone. I'm not a vindictive person by nature. But because I was finally done being the victim in someone else's twisted family drama. The phone call from Clara came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after she'd kicked me out. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee, and reading through some particularly interesting financial documents I'd requested from our accountant, when my phone buzzed with her name. For a split second, I thought about not answering. But curiosity got the better of me. Marcus. Her voice sounded different. Smaller. Less certain. We need to talk. Have you had time to reflect? Reflect. Like I was a naughty child who'd been sent to his room to think about what he'd done wrong. Sure, Clara, I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. I've had plenty of time to reflect. Good. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Say 2 o'clock? I think we should discuss how to move forward. Move forward. Translation. She wanted to see if I was ready to come crawling back, apologize for crimes I didn't commit, and probably sign some kind of agreement that would let her file for divorce while maintaining the moral high ground. I'll be there, I said. And I would be. But not for the reasons she thought. Time to show Clara and her manipulative sister exactly what 3 weeks of reflection had produced. You know that feeling when you're playing poker and you've got a royal flush, but you have to sit there with a straight face while everyone else at the table thinks they're about to clean you out? That's exactly how I felt sitting in my crappy apartment the morning after Clara's phone call, sipping coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through gym socks while mentally preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Clara wanted to meet at her office. Of course she did. Because why have a personal conversation about the implosion of your marriage in a neutral location when you can do it in the executive boardroom where you hold all the power? It was a classic Clara move. Control the environment, control the narrative, control the outcome. She probably had her whole speech prepared, maybe even had her assistant schedule it between her 10 o'clock with the Peterson account and her 3:30 with the city planning committee. Have you had time to reflect? She'd asked, like I was some kind of wayward employee who'd been suspended pending a performance review. The arrogance of that question was honestly breathtaking. Here was a woman who'd thrown her husband out of their home based on the word of her professional mooch of a sister, and she was asking me if I'd learned my lesson yet. Oh, I'd reflected, all right. I'd reflected so hard I was practically a goddamn philosopher at this point. I spent the morning getting ready like I was preparing for war, which, in a way, I was. Shower, shave, the whole 9 yards. I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one Clara had bought me for her company's annual gala last year, back when she was still proud to have me as arm candy at her business functions. Ironic, really. I was about to use her own gift to look professional while I systematically dismantled the assumptions that had led to this moment. The briefcase was the key prop in today's little drama. Black leather, expensive looking, the kind of thing that screams serious business in any corporate setting. Clara had given it to me for our 2nd anniversary, back when she thought having a project manager husband was charming instead of embarrassing. Inside, I'd carefully arranged all my research from the past 3 weeks. Copies of the prenup with the relevant sections highlighted, financial records, bank statements, screenshots of Sabrina's social media posts, documentation of my actual whereabouts during the times I was supposedly cheating. But the real beauty of my preparation wasn't what I'd included, it was what I'd left out. Because sometimes the most effective strategy isn't showing all your cards at once. Sometimes it's about letting your opponents think they know what you're holding while you keep the royal flush hidden until the perfect moment. I got to Clara's office building about 20 minutes early, because punctuality was one of those middle-class habits I'd never been able to shake, even after years of living in the penthouse. The lobby was all marble and glass and the kind of aggressive minimalism that screams, "We charge $500 an hour, and we're worth every penny." The security guard nodded at me like he recognized me, which he probably did from all the times I'd come here to surprise Clara with lunch or flowers, or just to be a supportive husband during her particularly stressful weeks. Those days felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, listening to the kind of generic jazz that's designed to make you feel sophisticated while you wait to get screwed over by people in expensive suits. The receptionist, Jessica, I think her name was, smiled at me with that professional warmth that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Mr. Hale, it's been a while. Mrs. Whitmore is expecting you. Conference room A. Conference room A. The big one. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The one where Clara held her most important meetings with investors and city officials. She wasn't just meeting with me. She was making a statement. This was business now, not personal. I was being summoned to the principal's office to discuss my behavioral issues. I sat in the waiting area, watching Clara's employees go about their daily routines. These were people I'd met at company parties, people who'd congratulated me when Clara and I got married, people who'd probably been gossiping about my mysterious disappearance for the past 3 weeks. I wondered how many of them knew the real story versus Sabrina's version of events. I wondered how many of them actually cared. The thing about corporate environments is that they have this way of making everything feel important and official, even when it's just personal drama dressed up in business attire. But that formality works both ways. If Clara wanted to treat this like a business meeting, then I was going to give her the full professional experience. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Documents ready when you are. Give them hell." Documents. Plural. Because while Clara had been spending the past 3 weeks basking in her victory over the terrible husband, I'd been doing something she apparently hadn't considered. I'd been getting legal advice from someone who actually knew what they were talking about. At exactly 2 o'clock, Jessica appeared at my side with that same professional smile. "Mrs. Whitmore is ready for you now." I followed her down the hallway, past the motivational posters and awards and photographs of Clara shaking hands with various important-looking people. This was her domain, her kingdom, her carefully constructed monument to success and control. And in about 10 minutes, I was going to show her exactly how much control she actually had over this situation. The conference room door opened, and there she was. Clara, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table like she was chairing a board meeting instead of having a conversation with her estranged husband. She looked good. She always looked good, but there was something different about her face. Tired, maybe, or stressed. The past 3 weeks hadn't been as easy as she'd pretended. And there, sitting to her right like some kind of evil advisor, was Sabrina. Because of course Sabrina was there. Of course the woman who'd orchestrated this entire situation would want to be present for my humiliation. She was probably planning to live tweet the whole thing. "Marcus," Clara said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Please sit down." I sat down and placed my briefcase on the table with deliberate care. Both women looked at it with curiosity, probably wondering what pathetic collection of apologies and promises I'd brought to grovel my way back into their good graces. "Thank you for coming," Clara continued, slipping into her CEO voice like putting on a familiar jacket. "I hope these past few weeks have given you time to think about everything that's happened between us. Everything that's happened between us. Like our marriage had just spontaneously combusted instead of being systematically destroyed by the woman sitting next to her." "Oh, I've been thinking," I said, keeping my voice calm and pleasant. "I've been thinking a lot." Sabrina leaned forward slightly, that familiar smirk playing around the corners of her mouth. She was enjoying this already, anticipating the moment when I'd break down and beg for forgiveness while she got to play the role of the protective sister who'd saved Clara from a terrible mistake. "Good," Clara said, "because I think we need to discuss how we're going to handle this situation going forward. Our marriage, our living arrangements, our future. Our future." The way she said it, with that slight pause, told me everything I needed to know about what kind of future she had in mind. There would be a divorce, probably with me taking the blame for the whole mess. There would be a settlement, probably heavily weighted in her favor. There would be a narrative where she was the successful businesswoman who'd been taken advantage of by a gold-digging husband, and Sabrina was the loyal sister who'd tried to warn her. It was a nice plan. Clean, simple, effective. Too bad for them that I'd spent the past 3 weeks coming up with a better one. Actually, Clara, I said, reaching for my briefcase, I think you're right. We do need to discuss our future. And I've brought along some materials that I think will help clarify exactly what that future is going to look like. The briefcase clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Both women were staring at me now with expressions that had shifted from confident control to something that looked suspiciously like uncertainty. Before we get started, I continued, pulling out a neat stack of papers. I just want to say that I've done a lot of reflecting over the past 3 weeks. About our marriage, about trust, about what happens when people make assumptions without checking the facts first. I placed the papers on the table between us and looked directly at Clara for the first time since I'd walked into the room. And what I've concluded is that you're absolutely right. We do need to discuss how we're going to handle this situation going forward. I slid the papers across the table to her with a smile that probably looked a lot more confident than I felt. Starting with these divorce papers, I'd like you to sign. You know that moment in chess when you move your queen into position and your opponent suddenly realizes they've been playing checkers this whole time? That's exactly what Clara's face looked like when those divorce papers hit the mahogany table with all the subtle impact of a nuclear bomb wrapped in legal letterhead. The silence in that conference room was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife and served it as an appetizer at one of Clara's fancy business dinners. Both women were staring at the documents like I'd just pulled a live snake out of my briefcase instead of a perfectly legitimate legal filing that had been prepared by one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. Clara's hand was hovering over the papers like she was afraid they might burst into flames if she actually touched them. Her perfectly composed CEO mask was starting to crack around the edges, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how the hell the meeting had gotten away from her this quickly. Sabrina, on the other hand, looked like someone had just told her Christmas was canceled and her trust fund had been donated to charity. The smirk that had been permanently attached to her face for the past 3 weeks had vanished completely, replaced by an expression that was somewhere between confusion and pure, unadulterated panic. What is this? Clara finally managed to say, her voice carrying just the tiniest tremor that told me I'd succeeded in rattling her cage in a way that probably hadn't happened since her first board meeting 20 years ago. Those are divorce papers, I said helpfully, like I was explaining basic math to a particularly slow kindergartner. You know, the legal documents that officially end a marriage when one party decides to throw the other party out of their shared home based on completely fabricated accusations. I kept my voice pleasant and conversational, the same tone I'd used to discuss the weather or ask someone to pass the salt. Professional courtesy, you might call it. After all, we were in a business setting, and I believed in maintaining appropriate workplace decorum even when I was systematically destroying someone's assumptions about how this conversation was going to go. Clara picked up the papers with hands that were definitely not as steady as they'd been 5 minutes ago. Her eyes started scanning the first page, and I watched her face go through a fascinating series of expressions as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Confusion gave way to shock. Shock gave way to disbelief. And disbelief was rapidly approaching something that looked suspiciously like the early stages of pure terror. "Marcus," she said slowly, like she was trying to talk a jumpy horse into not throwing her off a cliff. "Surely we can discuss this like adults. There's no need for lawyers and legal proceedings. We can work something out privately." Privately. Translation: she wanted to negotiate this mess behind closed doors where she could control the narrative and minimize the damage to her reputation. Where she could spin it as a mutual decision instead of the train wreck it actually was. "Oh, we absolutely can discuss this like adults," I agreed cheerfully. "In fact, that's exactly what we're doing right now. You're an adult, I'm an adult, and these are adult consequences for adult decisions." Funny how that works, isn't it? Sabrina had been unusually quiet during this exchange, which should have been my first warning that she was about to do something spectacularly stupid. But I was so focused on watching Clara's world crumble in real time that I didn't notice the storm brewing in the cheap seats until it was too late. You can't do this. Sabrina suddenly exploded, slamming her manicured hand down on the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. You can't just waltz in here and destroy my sister's life because you got caught red-handed. And there it was. The mask was completely off now, and Sabrina was showing her true colors in all their ugly, manipulative glory. Gone was the concerned sister act, the subtle poison whispered in Clara's ear. This was pure, undiluted rage from someone who'd just realized that her carefully constructed house of lies was about to come tumbling down around her ears. Caught red-handed doing what, exactly? I asked, turning to look at her directly for the first time since this whole circus had started. Please, enlighten me. What exactly was I caught doing? You know what you did? She shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that probably had dogs howling 3 blocks away. The affairs, the money, the lies. Which affairs? I interrupted calmly. The ones where I was supposedly seen at Cafe Milano when I was actually in a conference room with witnesses who can verify my whereabouts? Or maybe you're talking about the mysterious blonde woman who turned out to be a barista at Starbucks who can't spell my name correctly on a coffee cup. Sabrina's face was turning an interesting shade of red that clashed horribly with her designer outfit. The money transfers. The secret accounts. You mean my anniversary savings account? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app with theatrical precision. The one labeled Anniversary Fund, Italy trip that I was using to surprise Clara with a romantic vacation. Would you like to see the screenshots? Or should I just email them directly to Clara's legal team? This was the beautiful thing about dealing with pathological liars. They never expect you to have actual facts to back up your side of the story. They get so used to operating in a world of whispered suggestions and manufactured drama that they forget normal people keep records of things like bank statements and work schedules. Clara was still reading through the divorce papers, and I could tell she'd gotten to the really interesting parts because her face had gone from pale to absolutely ghostly. She was looking at the prenup clauses, the ones that spelled out in excruciating legal detail exactly what happened when a marriage ended due to unreasonable behavior on the part of the wealthy spouse. Unreasonable behavior. Like refusing to investigate accusations before acting on them. Like throwing your spouse out of the marital home without cause. Like prioritizing the word of a financially dependent family member over the person you'd promised to love, honor, and trust until death do you part. Marcus, Clara said quietly, and for the first time in months, she sounded like the woman I'd married instead of the CO who'd been interrogating me over dinner for weeks. These clauses, I don't remember agreeing to these terms. You insisted on them, I reminded her gently. You said you wanted me to feel secure in our marriage. You said you never wanted me to worry that you might use your wealth as a weapon against me if things got difficult. The irony was so thick you could have used it to pave roads. Clara had been so concerned about protecting me from hypothetical future Clara that she'd accidentally created a legal safety net for exactly this situation. Sabrina was reading over Clara's shoulder now, and I watched her face go from red to white to an interesting shade of green as she realized what those highlighted sections actually meant. Her sister, her meal ticket, her source of income, her entire lifestyle, was about to become significantly less wealthy, and it was all because of the lies Sabrina herself had planted. Clara, you can't sign this, Sabrina whispered urgently. There has to be another way. You can fight it. You can. Fight what? Clara asked, and her voice sounded hollow and defeated. Fight the prenup I insisted on. Fight the documented evidence that Marcus wasn't actually cheating. Fight the fact that I threw my husband out of our home based on accusations I never bothered to verify. She looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. The one who was brilliant and successful, but also vulnerable and uncertain beneath all that corporate armor. How much? She asked quietly. I pretended to think about it for a moment, even though I'd memorized every single clause and calculation weeks ago. According to the prenup you drafted, and given the circumstances of our separation, the monthly alimony comes out to roughly 30% of your net income for the next 5 years, with a lump sum payment of $2.4 million to be paid within 60 days of the divorce decree. Sabrina made a sound like she was choking on her own tongue. $2.4 million? Clara, you can't afford that. The business, the expenses, the gambling debts. I suggested helpfully. Oh yes, we'll definitely need to discuss those. Both women went very, very still. Even the air in the room seemed to stop moving, like the entire building was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Gambling debts, Clara repeated slowly. And that's when I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. Time for the real fun to begin. You ever watch a controlled demolition on TV? You know, where they blow up an old building and it comes down in slow motion, floor by floor, until there's nothing left but dust and debris? That's exactly what happened to Sabrina Whitmore's composure when I dropped the words gambling debts into that conference room like a stick of dynamite with a very short fuse. The transformation was honestly spectacular. 1 second she was sitting there trying to look like the concerned sister, still clinging to the last shreds of her victim act. And the next second, she was launching herself out of her chair like someone had just electrified the upholstery. "You bastard," she screamed, and I mean screamed, the kind of sound that probably sent every dog in a 5-block radius running for cover. "You lying, manipulative bastard. You can't prove anything." But there's the beautiful thing about gambling addicts, especially the kind who think they're smarter than everyone else. They leave a trail of evidence longer than the receipt from a Black Friday shopping spree at Macy's. And when that evidence involves stealing money from your sister's business accounts to feed your addiction, well, that trail becomes less like breadcrumbs and more like neon highway markers pointing straight to federal prison. Clara was staring at Sabrina like she'd never seen her before in her life. Gambling debts? Sabrina, what is he talking about? Nothing. Sabrina shot back, but her voice had gone up about 3 octaves, which is generally not what innocent people sound like when they're denying accusations. He's making it up. He's trying to deflect from his own crimes by my own crimes. I interrupted, reaching back into my magical briefcase of truth bombs. You mean like this? I pulled out a manila folder that was thick enough to choke a horse and placed it gently on the table between us. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents overhead. "These are bank statements," I said conversationally, like I was discussing the weather instead of about to destroy someone's entire life. "Not mine, obviously, since you've already established that my finances are an open book. These are from several offshore accounts that were opened using Clara's business credit and social security number." Clara's face went from pale to absolutely ghostly. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" "Well, it's interesting," I continued, opening the folder and spreading out the documents with the kind of care usually reserved for handling ancient manuscripts. "It seems someone has been making regular transfers from Whitmore Luxury Real Estate's operating accounts into these offshore holdings for the past 18 months. Small amounts at first, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, but gradually increasing in frequency and size." Sabrina was standing now, backing away from the table like the papers were radioactive. "You can't, that's not. How did I get these?" I smiled at her with all the warmth of a shark who'd just spotted a wounded seal. Funny thing about being married to a CEO, you pick up a few contacts in the financial investigation business. Turns out, when you pay the right people enough money, they can trace just about any financial irregularity back to its source. I pulled out another sheet. This one with highlighted sections that looked like a Christmas tree had exploded all over it. This particular account shows regular withdrawals at various casinos in Atlantic City, Las Vegas, and, my personal favorite, an online poker site called Lucky Lady's Last Chance. Really classy name, by the way. Very subtle. Clara was reading over my shoulder now, her breathing getting shallow and quick like someone was slowly squeezing all the air out of the room. "Sabrina, please tell me this isn't what it looks like." "It's not what it looks like," Sabrina shrieked, but she was still backing toward the door like she was planning to make a run for it. "He's fabricated all of this. He's trying to frame me because he knows he's caught." That's when I pulled out my phone and opened up the photo gallery with the kind of theatrical flourish that would have made Shakespeare proud. "You know, Sabrina, for someone who's supposedly being framed, you sure do take a lot of selfies at casino tables." The photos were beautiful, really. Crystal clear shots of Sabrina living her best life at blackjack tables, slot machines, and poker games, all tagged with locations and timestamps that corresponded perfectly with the dates of the mysterious account withdrawals. Social media had been her downfall. She'd been so proud of her high-roller lifestyle that she'd documented every single gambling session like she was creating evidence for her own prosecution. "These are from your Instagram account," I explained helpfully to Clara, who was staring at the photos like they were pictures of her sister committing murder. Apparently, Sabrina thought her gambling adventures were worth sharing with the world. Very civic-minded of her, really. Made my investigator's job much easier. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "You stole from my company? You stole from me. I didn't steal anything." Sabrina was full-on hyperventilating now, her designer dress sticking to her, with sweat despite the air conditioning that was probably set to Arctic. "It was just borrowing. I was going to pay it back. I was on a winning streak, and—" "A winning streak?" I laughed, and I'll admit it wasn't a particularly nice laugh. "According to these records, you've lost approximately $473,000 over the past 18 months. If that's a winning streak, I'd hate to see what you consider a losing streak." The number hit Clara like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward and had to grab the edge of the conference table to keep herself upright. $473,000? Sabrina, that's almost half our emergency operating fund. It would have been more, I added cheerfully, but the accounts got flagged by the fraud prevention system last month. Turns out banks get suspicious when someone suddenly starts making large transfers to offshore gambling sites. Who knew? That's when Sabrina completely lost what was left of her mind. She started screaming, not words, just pure, inarticulate rage, and before anyone could react, she grabbed the water pitcher from the conference table and hurled it at me with the kind of accuracy that suggested she'd been practicing. I ducked. The pitcher shattered against the wall behind me in a very satisfying explosion of glass and water, and suddenly the conference room looked like a hurricane had blown through it. "You destroyed everything," she screamed, advancing on me with her hands curved into claws like she was planning to scratch my eyes out. "Everything I worked for, everything I built, everything you built." Clara's voice cut through the chaos like a sword through silk. "You built nothing, Sabrina. You've never worked a day in your life. You've been living off my money, stealing from my company, and apparently lying to me about everything for years." The sisters were facing each other now across the wreckage of the conference room, and the family resemblance had never been clearer. They had the same bone structure, the same general build, but Clara looked like strength and determination, while Sabrina looked like those qualities had been twisted into something desperate and ugly. "I protected you from him," Sabrina shrieked, pointing at me like I was the devil himself. "He was using you. He was going to take everything you worked for. The only person who's been taking everything I worked for is you." Clara shot back, and her voice had that cutting edge that made her opponents in business negotiations break out in cold sweats. "You've been robbing me blind while telling me my husband was the criminal." I decided this was probably a good time to interject before someone ended up needing medical attention. "Clara, I think we should call security. And probably the police. Embezzlement is a felony, and assault with a water pitcher is at least a misdemeanor." The word police seemed to snap Sabrina back to something resembling reality. She stopped advancing on me and started looking around the room like she was just now realizing how completely screwed she was. "Clara, please," she said, and suddenly her voice was small and desperate instead of angry. "I'm your sister. Family. We can work this out. I can get help. I can go to therapy, join Gamblers Anonymous, whatever you want. Just don't." "Don't what?" Clara interrupted. "Don't hold you accountable for stealing from me? Don't expect you to face consequences for destroying my marriage? Don't demand answers for why you've been systematically lying to me for months?" The fight went out of Sabrina all at once, like someone had pulled her plug. She collapsed back into her chair and started crying. Not the pretty, delicate tears of a movie heroine, but the ugly, snotty, mascara-running kind of crying that people do when their entire world falls apart in the span of 10 minutes. Clara looked at her sister for a long moment, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. A very big apology. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Actually, Clara," I said, gathering up my papers with deliberate care, "I think what you owe me is a signature on those divorce papers. The real reckoning was just getting started. You know what they say about truth being stranger than fiction? Well, let me tell you, after spending 3 weeks digging into Sabrina Whitmore's financial activities, I was starting to think whoever came up with that saying had clearly never met someone whose entire life was built on a foundation of lies, theft, and what I can only describe as weaponized incompetence. But here's the thing about people like Sabrina. They never commit just one crime. They're like potato chips of criminal behavior. You can't steal just once. And while I was watching her have her dramatic meltdown in Clara's conference room, I realized I hadn't even gotten to the really juicy stuff yet. My lawyer had outdone himself. The man was like a financial archaeologist, digging through layers of deception to uncover artifacts of fraud that would have impressed the FBI's white-collar crime division. While Sabrina was still blubbering in her chair and Clara was staring at her sister like she'd never seen her before, I reached back into my briefcase one more time. Actually, I said, pulling out yet another folder that was even thicker than the first one. The gambling addiction is just the tip of the iceberg. Clara looked at me with eyes that were already so wide they were in danger of falling out of her head. There's more. Oh, honey, there's so much more. I opened the new folder with the kind of reverence usually reserved for handling nuclear material. See, when you hire a really good financial investigator, and I mean really good, the kind who charges more per day than most people make in a month, they don't just look at the obvious stuff. They dig deeper. They follow paper trails that most people don't even know exist. Sabrina had stopped crying and was now staring at me with the kind of horror usually reserved for people who've just realized they're in a horror movie and they're definitely not the final girl. What I discovered, I continued, spreading out documents like I was laying down a winning hand in the world's most expensive poker game, is that our dear Sabrina here has been running what you might call a diversified portfolio of fraud. The first document was a credit report that looked like it had been through a paper shredder and reassembled by someone having a nervous breakdown. Credit cards opened in Clara's name. 17 of them, to be exact, with a combined limit of just over $600,000. Clara's face went through a fascinating series of expressions, like she was cycling through every stage of grief simultaneously. Credit cards? In my name? All maxed out, naturally, I said cheerfully. The monthly payments have been automatically deducted from Whitmore Luxury Real Estate's accounts for the past 2 years. Your accounting department probably thought they were legitimate business expenses. I pulled out another sheet, this one covered in so many colored highlights it looked like a rainbow had exploded on it. Then there are the loans. Personal loans, business loans, something called a luxury lifestyle advance from a company that I'm pretty sure is just 3 guys in a basement somewhere who charge interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. Sabrina was making small whimpering sounds now, like a dog that knows it's about to get taken to the vet for something unpleasant. Clara, on the other hand, was getting that focused look she got when she was about to destroy someone in a business negotiation. How much? Clara asked, and her voice had gone completely flat and emotionless, which anyone who knew her would recognize as a very, very bad sign. I pretended to consult my notes, even though I had these numbers memorized down to the penny. Well, if we include the gambling losses, the credit card debt, the various loans, and the compound interest on everything, we're looking at approximately $1.2 million in total debt that's been systematically transferred onto your personal and business credit. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the elevator dinging in the hallway outside. Clara was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language, and Sabrina looked like she was seriously considering whether jumping out the 15th floor window would be preferable to whatever was about to happen next. But wait, there was more. Because when you're dealing with someone who's spent years perfecting the art of financial parasitism, you don't stop at simple theft. You branch out into more creative endeavors. Oh, and then there's the real estate, I said, pulling out what looked like a stack of property deeds and mortgage documents. Turns out Sabrina has been quite the entrepreneur in the property investment business. Clara's head snapped up. What property? 3 condos in Miami, a beach house in the Hamptons, and, this is my personal favorite, a timeshare in Aspen that apparently comes with its own private ski instructor. I spread out the paperwork with the kind of care usually reserved for handling evidence at a crime scene. All purchased using loans that were secured against Whitmore Luxury Real Estate's assets. That's impossible, Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. I would have had to sign off on any loans using company assets as collateral. I pulled out a magnifying glass. Yes, I actually brought a magnifying glass, because sometimes you have to lean into the drama, and handed it to her along with one of the documents. Take a look at the signature line. Clara examined the signature under magnification, and I watched her face go from confusion to understanding to pure, undiluted rage in the span of about 10 seconds. "This is my signature," she said quietly. "Technically, yes," I agreed. "But unless you've developed a sudden interest in timeshares and beach houses that you forgot to mention, I'm guessing you didn't actually sign these documents." Forgery. We'd officially moved from simple theft into federal crime territory, and judging by the look on Sabrina's face, she was starting to realize that her problems had just escalated from awkward family dinner conversation to potentially spending the next decade in an orange jumpsuit. "Sabrina," Clara said, and her voice was so cold it could have frozen nitrogen. "Did you forge my signature?" "I can explain." Sabrina burst out, finally finding her voice now that she was staring down the barrel of serious jail time. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I was going to pay everything back. The timeshare was an investment. The condos were appreciating in value. It was all going to work out. You forged my signature to steal over $1 million, Clara said slowly, like she was testing each word to make sure it was real. You destroyed my marriage with lies while you were robbing me blind. You've been living off my money, sleeping in a bed I paid for, eating food I bought, while systematically destroying everything I've worked for." The breakdown of their relationship was happening in real time, and it was honestly beautiful to watch. 28 years of sisterly bonds, built on trust and family loyalty and shared childhood memories, crumbling under the weight of documented evidence that Sabrina had been treating Clara like her personal ATM for years. "Clara, I'm your sister," Sabrina wailed, playing her last card with all the desperation of someone who's just realized they're holding a losing hand. "Family. Blood. That has to count for something." "You're right," Clara said, standing up slowly and walking over to where Sabrina was cowering in her chair. "It does count for something. It makes what you've done so much worse." She picked up her phone and started dialing. "Who are you calling?" Sabrina asked, though I think we all knew the answer. "The police," Clara said calmly. "And then my lawyer. And then my accountant. And then probably the FBI, because I'm pretty sure what you've done crosses state lines, which makes it a federal crime." Sabrina started crying again, but this time it wasn't the angry, frustrated crying from before. This was the kind of desperate, hopeless crying that people do when they realize their entire life has just imploded and there's no way to put the pieces back together. Clara looked at me across the wreckage of the conference room, across the destroyed remains of our marriage and her relationship with her sister, and for the first time in months, I saw something in her eyes that looked like respect. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I waited. "Is there any chance at all, that we could find a way to fix this?" And that's when I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her. You know that moment in every revenge movie where the hero has the villain exactly where they want them, and you're sitting there waiting to see if they're going to show mercy or deliver the killing blow. Well, let me tell you something about real life. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone isn't destruction. Sometimes it's just walking away and letting them live with the consequences of their own choices. Clara was looking at me with those big, desperate eyes that had once made me melt like butter on hot toast. The same eyes that had convinced me to propose, that had made me believe I was the luckiest guy in the world when she said yes, that had looked at me with such love and trust during our wedding ceremony that I'd actually teared up in front of 300 of Manhattan's most influential people. Now those same eyes were pleading with me to save her from the wreckage of her own making. "Is there any chance we could fix this?" she'd asked, and the hope in her voice was so fragile it was practically heartbreaking. Almost. I stood up slowly, gathering my papers with the same methodical care I'd used throughout this entire spectacular shit show. Every document went back into its proper folder. Every folder went back into the briefcase. Every piece of evidence that had just demolished her world packed away neat and tidy like I was cleaning up after a particularly successful business presentation. "Fix this," I repeated, testing the words like I was trying to figure out what language she was speaking. "Clara, honey, I'm not sure you understand what this actually is anymore." Behind her, Sabrina had finally managed to stop crying long enough to pay attention to our conversation, and I could see the desperate calculation in her eyes. She was probably thinking that if Clara and I got back together, maybe she could somehow wiggle out of the legal nightmare she'd created for herself. Maybe Big Sister would protect her one more time, cover for her crimes, find a way to make all the bad stuff disappear like it always had before. Too bad for Sabrina that those days were officially over. "I know I made mistakes," Clara said, and credit where credit's due. She was trying to maintain some dignity even though her entire world was collapsing around her ears. "I know I trusted the wrong person. I know I should have believed you instead of." She gestured vaguely at her sister, who was still huddled in her chair like a designer-dressed gargoyle. "Instead of me. I finished for her. Instead of your husband. Instead of the man you promised to love, honor, and trust until death do us part. Instead of the guy who spent 3 years of his life building a relationship with you while your sister was systematically robbing you blind and poisoning your mind against me." Each word hit her like a physical blow, and I could see her flinch with every accusation. But here's the thing about consequences. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care how sorry you are or how much you regret your choices. They just exist, heavy and permanent and utterly unforgiving. "Marcus, please," she said, and there was real pain in her voice now. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. But we can start over. We can rebuild. I'll make it right. Start over." Like the past 3 months had been some kind of minor disagreement, instead of a complete character assassination orchestrated by the person she'd chosen to trust over me. Like I could just forget the night she'd thrown me out of our home like garbage, the weeks of silence, the absolute certainty in her voice when she told me that Sabrina wouldn't lie to her about something so important. "How exactly are you planning to make it right, Clara?" I asked, closing the briefcase with a satisfying click that seemed to echo through the destroyed conference room. "Are you going to give me back the 3 years I spent married to someone who was willing to believe the worst about me without a shred of evidence? Are you going to undo the humiliation of being kicked out of my own home? Are you going to somehow erase the fact that when push came to shove, you chose your lying, stealing, manipulative sister over the husband who'd never given you any reason not to trust him?" The questions hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, and I could see Clara scrambling for answers that didn't exist. Because that's the thing about trust. Once it's broken, really truly broken, all the apologies in the world can't put it back together again. You can say you're sorry, you can promise to do better, you can even mean it with every fiber of your being. But you can't unknow what you learned about someone's character when they showed you who they really were in a crisis. And Clara had shown me exactly who she was when things got difficult. She was someone who would throw away 3 years of marriage based on the word of a person who'd been lying to her about everything else in her life. That wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be married to anymore. "I love you," she said desperately, playing her last card with all the finesse of someone who'd just realized the deck was stacked against them. "I know I screwed up, but I love you, Marcus. That has to count for something." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had been the center of my universe for 3 years, this brilliant, successful, powerful CEO who could negotiate million-dollar deals in her sleep, but couldn't see through her own sister's pathetically obvious lies. And I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no residual love trying to pull me back into the disaster she'd created. Just a vast, empty sense of being done with all of it. "You know what, Clara? I actually believe that you think you love me. But here's what I've learned about your version of love. It's conditional. It depends on other people's opinions. It evaporates the moment someone whispers something ugly in your ear. That's not love, sweetheart. That's just convenience with feelings attached." Sabrina tried to interject, probably hoping to salvage something from this train wreck, but I held up a hand that stopped her cold. "And you," I said, turning to look at her directly. "You don't get to say a goddamn word. You've done enough talking for one lifetime. Security will be here soon to escort you out. And then you get to spend the next few years explaining to various law enforcement agencies exactly how you thought stealing over $1 million from your sister was a reasonable life choice." I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door, leaving both women sitting in the wreckage of their relationship and Clara's business empire. But just before I reached the exit, Clara called out one last time. "Marcus, please, don't leave like this. I was wrong about everything, but we can fix it. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I'll do anything." I stopped with my hand on the door handle and turned back to look at her one final time. She was crying now, silent tears that tracked down her cheeks, and probably cost more than most people's monthly salary in ruined makeup. And for just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You want to know the really sad part about all of this, Clara? I said quietly. If you had just asked me about any of those accusations, if you had just given me the chance to defend myself instead of deciding I was guilty based on your sister's word, none of this would have happened. Your marriage would be intact, your business would be secure, and Sabrina would still be your problem to deal with instead of the FBI's. I opened the door, and the sounds of normal office life drifted in from the hallway, phones ringing, people having ordinary conversations about ordinary problems, the blessed mundane reality of a world where people weren't destroying each other's lives over fabricated betrayals. But you chose to trust her instead of me, I continued. You chose to believe the worst about the person who'd never given you any reason to doubt him. And now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. I walked out of that conference room, out of Clara's office building, out of the life I'd built with someone who'd turned out to be a stranger wearing the face of the woman I'd loved. Behind me, I could hear Sabrina starting to wail again and Clara trying to calm her down, but their voices faded as I made my way to the elevator. The doors closed with a soft ding, and as I watched the floor numbers count down toward ground level, I realized something that surprised me. I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I was free. You know how they say revenge is a dish best served cold? Well, let me tell you something about that particular piece of wisdom. It's absolutely true, but what they don't mention is that the best revenge isn't actually revenge at all. Sometimes the most satisfying outcome is just watching the universe handle your enemies for you while you're busy building a better life somewhere else. It's been 6 months since I walked out of Clara's conference room, and I've got to say, the view from my new reality is pretty damn spectacular. I'm sitting in my new office, not the cramped downtown shoebox I'd been hiding in during the divorce proceedings, but a legitimate office with windows that actually open and a coffee maker that doesn't sound like it's having an existential crisis every time I use it. The sign on the door reads, Hail Project Solutions, and business has been better than I ever imagined possible. Turns out, when you spend 3 years married to one of the most connected women in the city's business community, you pick up a few contacts of your own. And when those contacts hear that you're newly single and available for freelance project management work, and they've always thought you were the brains behind some of Clara's more successful ventures anyway, well, let's just say my phone started ringing pretty much the day after the divorce was finalized. The irony is beautiful, really. Clara used to joke that I was her secret weapon in negotiations, the guy who could spot problems before they became disasters and keep complicated projects running smoothly. She thought she was being complimentary, but what she was actually doing was advertising my skills to every major player in Manhattan's business scene. Now those same people are my clients, and I'm making more money in 6 months as a consultant than I made in 2 years as a salaried project manager. Turns out my middle-class work ethic and attention to detail are pretty valuable commodities when they're not being overshadowed by someone else's trust fund and family connections. But the real satisfaction isn't the money or the success or even the vindication of knowing I was right all along. The real satisfaction is watching Clara's empire crumble in real time while I'm building something solid and sustainable with my own 2 hands. The news started trickling in about a month after I left. Dave from my old job called me up, barely able to contain his excitement as he filled me in on the latest gossip from the Manhattan business community. Dude, you're not going to believe this, he'd said, but Clara's company is imploding. The fraud investigation, the missing money, the bad press. Investors are bailing left and right. It started with the banks. Once they realized the extent of Sabrina's financial crimes, they began calling in loans and freezing accounts faster than you could say embezzlement. Clara found herself dealing with the kind of cash flow problems that would make a small business owner break out in cold sweats, except she was trying to manage it while running a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. Then came the clients. Wealthy people don't like uncertainty, and they really don't like doing business with companies that make headlines for all the wrong reasons. When news broke that Whitmore Luxury Real Estate CEO had been systematically robbed by her own sister for nearly 2 years without noticing, it didn't exactly inspire confidence in Clara's business judgment. The shareholders were next. Board meetings turned into bloodbaths, with investors demanding explanations Clara couldn't provide and answers she didn't have. How do you tell a room full of people who trusted you with their money that you were so busy listening to lies about your husband that you completely missed the fact that your sister was stealing them blind? The final nail in the coffin was the regulatory investigation. When federal agencies start looking into your business practices, it doesn't matter how innocent you are. The mere existence of an investigation is enough to scare away anyone who might have been willing to stick around through the financial problems and the bad press. Within 4 months, Clara had gone from Manhattan real estate royalty to just another failed sale, looking for a buyer willing to take over her debt-ridden company for pennies on the dollar. The personal toll was even more spectacular to watch from a distance. Clara had to sell the penthouse, the same penthouse she'd thrown me out of with such righteous certainty. She'd downsized to a modest apartment in Queens, which must have felt like being exiled to Siberia for someone who'd spent her entire adult life living in Manhattan luxury. The social circle she'd cultivated so carefully over the years evaporated overnight. Turns out, when you're no longer useful to people who only valued your connections and your ability to host expensive dinner parties, those friendships disappear faster than free drinks at a wedding reception. But the real kicker, the absolute cherry on top of this poetic justice Sunday, was what happened to Sabrina. My lawyer kept me updated on her legal proceedings with the kind of professional glee usually reserved for people who just won the lottery. Federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement across state lines. The kind of charges that come with mandatory minimum sentences and the distinct possibility of spending the next decade explaining to federal prison inmates why you thought stealing from your sister was a reasonable career choice. Sabrina tried to make a deal, of course. She offered to testify against Clara, claiming that her sister had been complicit in the financial schemes all along. But here's the problem with being a pathological liar who's spent years manipulating everyone around you. When you finally need people to believe you, you discover that your credibility account is completely overdrawn. The prosecutors weren't interested in her testimony because they couldn't trust anything that came out of her mouth. Her own defense attorney reportedly described her as the least reliable witness in the history of federal criminal proceedings. And Clara, despite everything Sabrina had put her through, refused to throw her sister completely under the bus, which meant Sabrina couldn't even get a deal by fully cooperating. She got 8 years in federal prison, and from what I hear, she's not adjusting well to life without credit cards and personal shoppers. Clara tried reaching out to me a few times during those chaotic months. Voicemails that started apologetic and gradually became more desperate as her situation deteriorated. Text messages that ranged from, "I hope you're doing well," to "Please, I need to talk to someone who understands what really happened." I ignored every single one, not out of spite, though I'll admit spite played a small role in my decision-making process. I ignored them because I genuinely had nothing to say to her. What was I supposed to do? Offer comfort to the woman who destroyed our marriage based on lies? Provide business advice to someone who demonstrated such spectacularly poor judgment? Pretend that 3 years of my life hadn't been wasted on someone who valued her sister's manipulation over her husband's honesty? The final paperwork for our divorce was signed on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after she'd thrown me out of the penthouse. I met her at the courthouse, neutral ground, lawyers present, everything official and impersonal. She looked smaller than I remembered, worn down by months of stress and financial pressure, and the kind of social isolation that comes from being publicly humiliated in a very small, very gossipy business community. "Marcus," she said as we waited for the judge to process the final documents, "I want you to know that I understand now. About everything. About what she did to us. About what I did to us. I understand that I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too proud and too stupid to see what was right in front of me." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in months, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no residual affection. She was just a stranger who happened to share some unpleasant history with me. "I know you do," I said quietly, "but understanding what you did wrong doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't give me back the 3 years I spent married to someone who was willing to believe the worst about me without evidence. It doesn't change the fact that when our marriage was tested, you chose your sister over me. If I could take it all back. But you can't. I interrupted gently. And that's the point, Clara. Some mistakes don't get do-overs. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Some relationships, once destroyed, can't be rebuilt. The judge called our case, and we went through the final formalities of legally ending what had once been the most important relationship in both our lives. Signatures, stamps, official declarations that Marcus and Clara Hale were no longer married, no longer legally bound to each other, free to pursue separate futures. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year, genuine happiness. Not the bitter satisfaction of watching your enemies destroy themselves, not the grim pleasure of being proven right about everything, but real, honest-to-God happiness about what came next. I had a business that was thriving, friends who actually valued me for who I was instead of what I could provide, and for the first time in my adult life, a future that belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, I can honestly say that getting thrown out of that penthouse was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I enjoyed the pain or the humiliation or the months of legal battles, but because it forced me to discover that I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than I'd ever given myself credit for. Clara's world collapsed because she built it on a foundation of other people's money and other people's lies. My new world is solid because I built it myself, one honest client relationship and one successful project at a time. And when I signed those final divorce papers, I didn't just end my marriage to Clara Whitmore. I began my life as Marcus Hale, and let me tell you, it's a hell of a lot better than anything I left behind.